Every Sunday night we do Parsha. And the guys who are here from last year know that I have a lot of run-on series on Parsha where I start topics and they go on and on and on and on and on, like forever and a half. It's going to happen later this year, Mitzvah Hashem. I did 8 of the Shvatim. There are 12 Shvatim. I did 8 of them. We spent 8 classes going through Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehudi, Yisachar, Zvulun, Dan, Naphtali. When we get to Vayetze, I'm hoping to do a couple more. Maybe I'll finish even this year. And then we're doing Aseret Sadibris. But this week, it's a standalone class. You don't have to remember from last week and you forget it by next week. I'm not saying you should, but you're permitted to. The topic is a simple one. It's in today's Chitas, Sunday, today's Chitas. We all know the Chitas. I did not learn Chitas today yet. I did prepare the class, but I did not learn the Chitas yet, I'm admitting. Avraham Avinu does the Bris Milah at the age of 99. Hashem is worried about him. So Hashem makes it extraordinarily hot. He has the sun come out. Take it was very, very hot and nobody was passing by. And Avraham Avinu went into a disappointment. Why? Because Avraham Avinu lived for Achnasas Orchim. His whole life was to be able to bring people into his house and to feed them and look after them and take care of them and to provide for them. And then of course, that they should say at the end of their meal, they should thank Hashem for their meal and so on. So because it was so hot, nobody was out, nobody was traveling, and Avraham Avinu was sitting at the door of his tent looking for passersby. And the Eibishter saw that Avraham Avinu is nishtazeh gishmak, so he sent 3 Malachim, b'demus hanoshim. He sent 3 angels who looked like people to pass by Avraham's tent and to provide Avraham Avinu with an opportunity to do hachnasas orchim. I don't know if I've ever given a class on that. I do want to give a class on it one day. What does it mean that there were Malachim, b'demus hanoshim, angels in the countenance of people? My favorite pirush is the Rabbeinu Bechaya. Rabbeinu Bechaya tries to make everybody happy. So he walks between the raindrops. Rabbeinu Bechaya answers the question about how Malachim could be in a physical body by saying that what happened was there were a couple of Bedouins, what we call today Arabs, Bedouins, people lived in the forest, in the desert. One day were possessed by Malachim. And for a few hours, their bodies were occupied by the Malachim. And what the Malachim needed to go, they went. What the Malachim needed to say, they said. What the Malachim needed to do, they did. And when the Shlichus was finished, the Bedouins were back in their desert, looking after their sheep or camels or goats, and they didn't know what happened. Everything was good. There's a couple of hours missing from their record, but this explains how Malachim could come into a guf. This is what Rabbi Bechaya says, so that they should be able to do the Shlichus on a physical level. Especially when you understand that the way Rashi explains it, that Avraham Avinu did not right away know they were Malachim. Avraham Avinu thought they were human beings. He tells them to wash their feet because he was worried about Avodah Zarah, and only afterwards they come into the house and he offers them food. At some point it looks like Avraham figured out that these were not people but Malachim. But at least in the beginning, when Avraham Avinu was initially hosting them, he brought them into his home, assuming that they were people. It was being machnes eirech. He was doing what Avraham Avinu loved to do, which was to give things to make people feel good, to give people what they needed, and to look after them, and so on. And of course, to teach them about the Eibishter. The Rambam says something completely radical. It's interesting to me how few people know this Rambam, even though it's one of those Rambams that literally shakes the earth. The Rambam holds that the entire story with Avraham Avinu and Malachim never happened. Right. The Rambam holds as a philosophy that a malach cannot come into a guf. An angel cannot be in a physical body. It's impossible. The Rabbeinu Bechaya wants to make the Rambam right also, so he comes up with the solution of this possession, that the malachim went into the bodies of Bedouins. But the Rambam holds a malach cannot be in a physical guf, and therefore the Rambam says one of the most radical Rambams, which makes the Ramban, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman, the Nachmanides, really, really, really upset at the Rambam. And if you don't believe me, you can take out the Ramban and read how he quotes the Rambam and how he beats up on him. And the Rambam therefore said that the entire story, from the beginning to the end, was a vision. It didn't happen. Avraham Avinu had a prophecy, and in the prophecy he was standing at the center of his tent, and in the prophecy 3 men came, and in the prophecy he made them food, and in the prophecy they told him about Sarah having a little baby boy. In the prophecy they went to save light. In the prophecy they turned over the stone. None of that actually happened. Now, stone was physically turned over, but there were not 3 physical bodies, 2 of which went to Sodom to turn over the city. That was all a vision. And the Ramban goes really upset about this. And by the way, along the same lines, the story with the donkey and Balak, where the donkey speaks to Bilam, the whole situation, and according to Rashi and the Gemara, the donkey dies. The Rambam holds that story also never happened. Because the Rambam holds that a malach cannot come down into a physical body, and therefore the Rambam holds that that story as well was entirely a vision. The Gan Sem Maisa was a nevuah. There was no actual donkey talking to Bilam. Bilam had some kind of a vision, and in his vision, he sees himself hitting the donkey for going off the road a few times, and he doesn't understand why the donkey is not listening to him, and then suddenly he sees an angel, and the angel says, I came out to stand in your way, and Bilam asks him, should I go back? He says, no, you can continue, but do whatever I say. And that entire thing never happened. Again, the Ramban goes absolutely upset. Okay, this is a bizarre zach, but if Madoch, an explicit pasuk in the Chumash, the Rambam says it's not literal, a Medrash for sure is not literal. This is the Ramban's opinion. The Rambam's opinion. Go ahead.
If they were inhabiting human bodies, then why couldn't they eat?
Wait, that's our topic. That's our topic. It's exactly our topic.
Second question is, isn't it saying quickly obvious that the jaw of Bilam's donkey was created?
Yeah, Erev Ben Shmoshes, yeah.
So if it was a vision, what jaw was created?
I'll tell you the truth. I could give you the Rambam's email, but first of all, he said I shouldn't give it out to people like you because you're going to make them feel uncomfortable. And second of all, from what I understand, his email box is full. He's not answering any emails. It's a good question, and if you would learn all the controversial Rambams, your hair would start falling out of your skull, not standing up straight. There's so many Shvere Rambams. You have no idea. The Rambam is the Rambam. But it doesn't take away, in other words, our job is to understand the Rambam, not to say, that he says things which are beyond the pale. The topic of tonight is not about whether the Malachim were in bodies or not. The topic of tonight is what is the meaning of the statement the Malachim ate food. Malachim came, and Avraham prepared for them a feast. In order for Avraham to feed these 3 Malachim, he had to kill 3 animals. And most of the meat, I don't know where it went. They fed it to the dogs, I don't know where it went. Because he wanted to give each one a tongue, which is the most tender meat on an animal, of course. It's not really a muscle. And he served them with chadl. Chadl is a mustard, which was apparently a delicacy in those times, and fresh bread, and margarine, and milk. Now, of course, we all have the problem with basa b'cholav, how to eat meat and milk together. And the way we explained it, Parshas, was first they had the milchiks, and then they had the fleishiks. But Avraham served them a feast it's unbelievable. For those of you who know the Gemara, Masechet Bava Metzia, the Gemara Bava Metzia talks about a person who hires a worker. If you hire a worker, one of your obligations to your worker is that you need to give him lunch. So the Gemara suggests when you hire a worker, you need to give him lunch, you have to specify what the meal is going to be. Because if you don't specify what the meal is going to be, you have to give him more than Su'udas Shleima B'Shaiteh. In the book of Malachim, book of Kings, when the first Beis HaMikdash was put up, the Navi describes the meal that Shlomo HaMelech made for all the people who came for the Chanukah Sabayis of the first Beis HaMikdash. He killed hundreds of thousands of animals, and he fed them. The food was so lavish and so abundant, so generous. People literally walked home in wheelbarrows. He fed them and he fed them. And it was a lot of food. It was tasty food. It was rich food. And the Gemara says that if you give a Yid a Kisudat Shleima B'Shaiteh, you have not met your obligation. So if you hire a worker, tell him that you're giving a scrambled egg with 2 slices of toast, because if you don't specify what you're going to feed him, even if you're going to give him Su'udat Shleima B'Shaiteh, it's not enough. Why not? Why not? Because you have to give him like Avraham gave the Malachim. And the Avraham gave the Malachim more than Su'udas Shleima B'Shaiteh. Because he literally had to kill an entire animal to give one guy a tongue. He killed 3 of them.
Yeah, he killed 3.
3. So the Ishmael should have a tongue. So the Gemara says, Su'udah Shleima B'Shaite becomes the expression, it becomes the allusion, the denotation for a lavish meal. But the Gemara says it's not the most lavish meal. The most lavish meal is more than Su'udah Shleima B'Shaite. And if you don't specify in the contract what you're going to give your chimney sweep for lunch, you're going to have to give him that meal. It's not the meal of Shleima, the Beis HaMikdash, what Avraham gave to 3 Malach. So Avraham Avinu really was very, he must have been so wealthy. I mean, if any guy came to his house, he killed an animal to take a tongue out, I'd say, I don't know what he did with all the extra meat. I don't know what he did with it. So the meal is prepared. And a few very interesting things happen. First of all, Sarah is making the bread. And she becomes a nida. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Sarah's 90 years old. She hasn't menstruated, she hasn't ovulated, she hasn't bled in 50 years. She was an old lady. Now, last week, in the end of Parshas Lech Lecha, Hashem told Avraham Avinu that Sarah is going to have a baby. And Sarah began to see her own body become youthful. But punkt at the time that the 3 Malachim showed up and she was preparing the bread, she became a nida. Now, who cares? It's before Matan Torah. Even she was not mechuyev in the halachas of nida. The 3 Arab goyim for sure were not mechuyev in the halachas of nida. But Avraham, the Zohar speaks about this. Avraham was careful to keep the highest standards Tara in his home. Even the food that he fed the non-Jews, if he wouldn't eat it, he wouldn't feed it to them. Avraham Avinu, the Gemara, the Zohar says, ate dachyo, Tahara, 1 minute, so the bread wasn't served. The bread wasn't served. There's no reason a person can't eat bread that was needed by a woman that became needed. There's no reason whatsoever. It's not Tahara, it's not the Beis HaMikdash, before Matan Torah. Avraham was not mechuyev in mitzvahs. Let alone those 3 Arabs, but the Zohar says Avraham kept a very high standard, and it's negated tonight's Shir as well. So the bread was off the table. Then, of course, the big question is what to do about the milchiks and the fleishiks. Some say that they ate the fleishiks first and the milchiks second, but they just didn't eat it together. And others say, no, they ate the milchiks first and the fleishiks second, because eating fleishiks after milchiks is much more understandable, much more allowed than eating milchiks after fleishiks. And of course, the final question, which is really our topic, is since when do Malachim eat? Omed Alihem tachas ha'etz. They ate outside under this tree, right? Some people thought it was a pundik, that means a hotel, and some people say it was an ilan. It was a beautiful, beautiful tree that Avraham Avinu planted in the middle of a desert to create shade and a good company, good weather, to be very pleasant for people to eat, and he served people under the tree. And Avraham stood over them as they ate. He stood over them under the tree, VaYochailu, and the Malachim ate. So the topic of our class, really directly, is not the question of the Malachim. I'll do that another time. The topic of our class is what is the meaning of the fact that the Malachim ate food? It's a funny thing. It's a very, very odd concept. Malachim don't eat. Malachim don't need to eat. And they don't necessarily have the plumbing to eat. And however you explain the physiology of the Malachim, it becomes very problematic, or as they say in Brooklyn, problematical, that the Malachim are described in the Chumash as having eaten food. And the Gemara talks about it, the Midrashim talk about it, and of course, the Zohar talks about it, Kabbalah talks about it, and Chassidus talks about it, and we're going to go through the whole evolution. We're talking about all the different levels. So that's our topic. How do we understand the significance of the Malachim eating? So the Zohar, on our Parshas Lech Lecha, Parshas Vayera, Daf Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, brings down 2 opinions. The first opinion of the Zohar is they didn't really eat. They made believe they were eating. They were in the presence of Avraham Avinu. They wanted to honor Avraham Avinu. They wanted to make him feel good because he was such a big tzaddik. And because of this, they made believe they were eating. They put the food in their mouth and the food would disappear. You have in the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, the story with Shimshon HaGiber. And I think you have it someplace else also by maybe Yiftach, by one of the other Shoftim, I forgot his name at the moment, who offered food to a man who was a malach. He didn't know he was a malach, he thought it was a man, and he said, "How can I eat it?" And he touched it, he put it on a stone, he touched it, the food caught fire, and the malach went up to heaven with the smoke of that fire. So there's an understanding that the malach puts the food in his mouth, and the food vanishes. It's like it disappears completely. But it's not considered eating. That's one opinion. There's another opinion also found in the Zohar. Rabbi Lazar says, no, they actually ate it. But You need to understand, you and I eat food for very different reasons than Malachim eat food, right? We eat food to sustain our bodies. Our bodies need, first of all, energy. Right? For those who do not know the biology, and I don't know it either, but I happen to know this fact, the most readily consumable form of energy is oxygen. Oxygen is energy. It gives us koyach. And we have to breathe literally every second, every few seconds in order to sustain oxygen. In addition, we need power, which comes from the bread we eat, the meat we eat, whatever it is that we eat. And of course, the food we eat, besides for energy, becomes body parts. It becomes the chemical components and the biological components that our body needs for renewal, for regeneration. So when we eat food, we don't destroy the food. We make the food into our own body. It becomes our cells. It becomes the different chemicals that the body needs to sustain itself, to strengthen itself, to renew itself, and so on and so forth. That's what happens to our food. Malachim ate. And according to the second opinion in the Zohar, they mamish ate. They ate actually. But they didn't need it to sustain their body because they didn't really have a body. They didn't really have a body. 1 second. And they didn't really have a body, so then what was the significance of their eating? So he says it was eaten like a korban. It was consumed and it went up. You and I eat, the food becomes us, and we become the food because we need the nourishment. The Malachim didn't need the nourishment. But at the same time, they didn't just make believe they were eating the food, they were actually consuming it. But the nature of the consumption was that it went up to the Eibishter, so to speak, like a korban. It goes eish oichla eish, fire eating fire.
What's the big deal if they actually ate it? Like they anyways were in a physical body, and that body's probably going by like the rules of nature. So it's a big deal if they actually eat it.
The question becomes, what is the nature of the body of a malach when he is in a body? That's the fundamental question. And apparently it's not the kind of, in other words, it looks like our body, maybe we could touch it and it feels like our body, but it's not the same thing, and this is why you have a question. And perhaps I'll get to your point a little bit more later. Go ahead.
Isn't that case giving it to the angels to some extent by Zara?
You know that this is discussed in the Mefarshim also. It's actually brought up in the Mefarshim, giving it to the Malachim, and there's a whole explanation. The answer to your question is, you have to first want to think of it, and the answer at the moment, I don't know. It's a big arichis in the different svarim.
You said the Lord tonight, they so to speak, attacked the bunch of our both from that one.
The Rabbi erase the Zohar for a few minutes, and this will answer your question and your question and your question. The question is, what does it mean the Malachim ate? And the first commentary is the Radak, Reb David Kimchi. The Radak, I think he lived before the Rambam. The Radak also holds that the story with Avram and the Malachim never happened. The whole thing was a vision. So he answers the question without it being a question in the first place. The Radak simply says, how could Malachim eat? The answer is Malachim didn't eat. Malachim didn't exist. Because the whole story with the three angels didn't happen physically. The whole story with the three angels is, as the Rambam says, a vision that the Avraham Avinu saw. So the question goes away automatically because there was no people, there was no food, there was no eating. That's what the Radak says. Now, the Rabbeinu B'chaya, your point is also correct. He has almost as good a solution. If you follow the Rabbeinu B'chaya's version, who addresses the question, same question that Rambam has. How could an angel come into a physical body? Only a soul could come into a physical body. An angel cannot come into a physical body, which is why the Rambam and the Radak hold the story never happened, the whole thing was a vision. So the Rabbeinu B'chaya's answer is that they possessed the body of three Bedouins for a couple of hours to do the story, and then they went back to being Bedouins, and the angels went back into heavens. If you follow that version, so there's the answer to your question right away. Since they were the bodies of people, notwithstanding that the bodies of those people for the duration of the story were possessed with the words and the thinking and the spirit of the Malachim, it's not a question how they could eat, because biologically they were physical people and they ate like physical people and so on. It's a good, that's your point, and that's the second answer to the question. I just want to say one thing parenthetically, I'll get to you in a second. This question has other contexts. The Rebbe, after the Frierdiker passed away, spoke about the fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe is alive. The Rebbe was a radical. The Frierdiker Rebbe was alive. And when the Rebbe discussed it, he explained it from a Gemara and a Sefer Hasidim and a Chidah. It's in Likutei Sichos. The Gemara says in Masechet Ksubis that every Friday night Rabbeinu HaKadosh would come home to his family after he passed away. And he would spend the night. He would leave in the morning. And one of the servants told the neighbor to be quiet. So this neighbor said, "Why should I be quiet?" He said, "Because the Rebbe is here." So you're nuts, Rebbe? But no, he comes home every Friday night. Anyway, after that secret was revealed, the Rebbe stopped coming. Or at least that maid servant no longer saw. That's what it says in the Gemara. On this Gemara, it says in Sefer Chassidim, from the great Rishon and great Mekubal Yehuda Chassid, that the Rebbe came home and he made Kiddush and he drank physical wine, which is the same question that our class has. And on this, the Chidah adds a third component. The Rebbe came home in a physical body. He made physical Kiddush, made physical wine. And the most controversial piece of all, he was yoytze everybody else with his Kiddush. And the question becomes, the halacha is, the Gemara says, by Mesim Chavshi, when a person dies, they're potter from all mitzvahs, which is why, as I'm sure you know, our custom is when a person is deceased, they bury a person in a talis, but they dafka make the tzitzis puzzle. They cut the corner. They make the tzitzis puzzle because the dead person's potter from tzitzis. And the Rebbe once spoke, what's going to happen by Tchias HaMesim? We're going to come back with puzzle and tzitzis. How we're going to get our tzitzis fixed right away? Otherwise, a shayla from wearing dal comforts without tzitzis. So the chiddush is not that he came in a body. The chiddush isn't even that he made kiddush and he dried wine. The chiddush is that he was yaitz of people who were physically alive. So the Rebbe says, is that ayah from this chidah, when Rabbeinu HaKadosh came in a body, it wasn't just a miracle, he was actually halachically living. For harayah, not only did he physically appear and physically drink wine, he could be yaitz, a living person with kiddush. And the Rebbe said the same thing also about something else. When the Alter Rebbe was sitting in jail, and he was visited by the Mezritcher Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov, and he asked them, "Why am I sitting in jail?" And they told him, "You're sitting in jail because you're spreading too much Hasidus." So the Alter Rebbe said, "Okay, so when I go out of jail, I'll stop." And they said, no, now that you started, if you survive this ordeal, you should spread even more. So the Rebbe asked, the halacha is, Teira leiba shemayim, Teira is not in heaven. So if a neshama comes from heaven and paskins the halacha, you're not allowed to follow that opinion. So how could the Alter Rebbe rely on his Rebbes to continue spreading Chassidus? They were not in this world. And the Rebbe answered, because this is what you said, because they became in a body, they were physical. And that's a simple way of explaining the Malachim's eating. The Malachim's eating, it can be explained physically because when they came in a physical body, especially according to the Rabbeinu Bechaya, that it wasn't even the body of the Malach, they possessed the body of a regular Bedouin that they were able to eat.
But you're saying the Rebbeinu came to the Rebbe in a body, or?
In a body. Yes.
I'm saying, but were they in heaven and they came down from heaven?
Yeah. Whatever the heaven, with Rabbeim and these things, I don't know. Face it. Now, getting back to our question. What does it mean that the Malachim ate? According to the Radak, it was a vision. According to the Rabbeinu Bechaya, they were physical bodies. They weren't even Malachim eating. Rashi says, and this is really written in the Gemara, Rashi says, Nidin Keichlin. The Malachim were not eating. They were making believe they were eating. And the Gemara says, Bikan sheleishana adam in amini. The Gemara says, Azles lekarta halach b'ni musei. When you come to a country, you should behave like the people of that land. And the Zohar speaks about this also in Parshas told us, Dafkuf Mem Daled, that when you go to a certain place, you should act like the people that are around you. And since in the physical world people eat physical food, when the Malachim came down here, they ate physical food. They made it look like they're eating physical food. That doesn't mean it's the same thing as the Zohar, because looking like you're eating food is not the pshat eating food in a different esoteric model. It doesn't necessarily mean that they ate the food in a way which was that you'll use for them. Rashi says they made it look like they were eating food because they were in a world where people eat. They should act like those of us who are eating. But the food served no purpose for them at all. That's what Rashi says. The Medrash says, there's a bunch of Medrashim. One of the Medrashim says is that Avraham Avinu was such a big tzaddik. And he tried so hard to provide pleasure for his guests. And he went so far out of his way to give them something to eat because he wanted the pleasure of feeding them, that because of this, the Lashon is, Hashem opened up their mouths and they ate. Hashem opened up their mouths and they ate. So what does it mean? Hashem, Pasach Hashem is Pi VaYochailu. I guess it means they looked like people. They looked like they were in their bodies. But they looked like people only in terms of the mission that they needed to do. The mission that they needed to do was to send messages, was to heal Avraham, to save light. It wasn't to eat food. So their shlichus did not involve eating food. So they didn't need that part of the biological plumbing to do that mission. But because of how hard Avraham Avinu tried, the Eibush made an additional ness that not only were they in bodies, but they developed the plumbing that allowed them to eat, and they ate. Now, the Gemara says very, very similar thing to Rashi. The Gemara says, La'olam al yeshana adam atzmei min haminag. You should never go different than your custom. When Moshe Rabbeinu went to heaven, he was there for 40 years, and he didn't eat because in heaven nobody eats. When the Malachim came down to this world, they ate because people eat, even though the food served no purpose as far as the Malachim were concerned. This is like a Valdika Medrash. And this Medrash is in Psikte. We all know from the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos that the Malachim thought Eibush was making a big mistake to give us the Torah. Why? The people are going to sin, they're going to die, it's going to be a mess. To know, give the Torah to us, we'll handle it much better. So this is best in the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos. But there's a Medrash that pushes it to another level. And the Medrash says that the Malachim thought it was a bad idea, they were giving us a Torah. But they were particularly adamant that it was a bad idea when it came to the second luchas. Why were the two luchas? Because he made the egel. He made the golden calf. Moshe broke the first luchas. And the Torah had to be written the second time. So as much as the Malachim complained the first time around that it was a bad idea that the Eibush is giving us the Torah, they complained doubly when it came to the second luchas. The Malachim said to the Eibush that I don't understand you. You don't see how big a mistake it is? Before you even gave them the Torah, they transgressed the worst sin in the entire Torah. They worshipped idols, and you're going to give them a second chance? And the Eibush was almost stumped. Mainly the first time, the Eibush could say, they went into Mitzrayim, they have fathers and mothers, they do commerce, they have jealousy. But after they sinned and they failed, so the Eibush said to Malach, I want to ask you a question. I sent you down into this world. Listen carefully. I sent you down into this world. I sent you to Avraham Avinu's house. And you ate milk and meat successively, one after the other, without rinsing your mouth. And the Seder in the Medrash is first milk and then meat. He said a newborn baby would not do that. A newborn baby on earth knows that after you eat meat, if you want to eat milk, you have to rinse your mouth and rinse your hands. And of course, some of the Mefarshim point out that the Seder of eating meat before milk is problematic, and some say that it's the other way around, but the etzem inyan of not eating milk and meat together. Why? Because if you read the Chumash without Rashi, without the Mefarsh, or the Gemara, it simply says, don't eat the meat and milk together. So if you take the pasuk literally, without the help of the Gemara and all the other issues, so you could eat meat and then eat milk, you're just not supposed to eat them at the same time. So the Eibush says to the Malachim, you're complaining that I'm giving the Yidden the Torah because they made the Egel Azov. I sent you down into the world. I put you into a body. I gave you an opportunity to do a mitzvah, and you ate meat and milk in such succession, there wasn't a chance for the meat, the taste of the meat to go out of the mouth before you started eating the milk. Babies know halacha, more particular halacha better than you. That's what David said to the Malachim to placate them, to answer them.
Why didn't you say that they eat the milk? You can't have the Torah.
I'm telling you, they state in the Medrash. As they state in the Medrash. And on the Medrash, this is Torah Shleima. So Rabbi Nacham Kasher brings different opinions, including Deis, who said that there's a different girsa that they ate first the milk and then they ate the meat. But it's sufficient to say that they didn't eat the meat and the milk together, because that's what it says in the pasuk. Now, what's the pshat in this? What's the pshat? It's a Gavaldika Kasher. The Malachim are saying, don't give the Torah to the Yidden because they're going to violate it. So the Eibishter tells them, you're bigger violators of the Torah than the Yidden are. Why? Every child knows you don't eat meat and milk together, and you ate them in such succession, it was like eating meat and milk together. That's what the answer is. No, Basar B'chalav. Now wait. What?
It was before the Torah was given.
Fine. But they were Malachim.
They also not actually eating it.
So according to this Medrash, they were actually eating it. Wait, I want to explain to you the Lumdis. I'm sorry?
Hot mitzvahs though, so it's not even...
It's the same issue when they come into a guf and they're in Avraham Avinu's house.
Humans weren't either given mitzvahs yet, just offering.
So in Avram's house, and the Malachim knew the mitzvahs.
Price they ate, just like they ate.
Yeah.
After the minute Malachim, they kept the Torah.
Right.
They wanted the Torah in Shemayim, not they wanted to have the Torah in Shemayim.
Okay. I want to explain to you the pshat of this medrash. I hold your kashas are kashas, okay? But the underlying issue is they're saying, give us the Torah, and the Eibusha says, I gave you the Torah, and you were more violating of the Torah than a Tinnik ben Yemei. To eat milk and meat together, almost eat meat and milk together, whatever it was. Why big enough it is? I don't understand.
You said
Yeah, but what the Eibush was saying to the Malachim is, you're big Talmidei Chachamim, and you did Avera that a child wouldn't do. So he's not comparing them to Avodah Zarah. He's comparing them to a child. Avodah Zarah is a kasha.
No one were that stupid that they actually.
But listen, I want to explain to you the pshat in this medrash. I want to explain to you what I think is pshat in this medrash. You'll understand it. Okay, and I'll tell you a little mice. And this story, you should know, has a lot of truth. This story has a lot of truth. They tell a story about the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim he lived a very, very long life. He lived a very long life. He for sure lived into his 90s. Some people say he was over 100. You've heard of the Chafetz Chaim, right? You heard of the Chafetz Chaim? Yeah. Chafetz Chaim was a tzaddik. He was a Litvash. The Rebbe said he was the Rebbe of the Litvish. He was a Yirei Shamayim. He was a Oyev Yisrael. He was a holy man. Nothing to talk about. The Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim, because he lived so long, was married more than once, maybe more than twice. People who knew him had no idea how old he was. Literally. So one of his wives, second wife, or third wife, was cleaning for Pesach. She was on her hands and knees and she was scraping the tiles, the floor. So he says to her, you don't got to do that. And she says to her husband, I didn't exactly ask you. You go back to your books and you learn how to clean the Pesach. She says to her, I happen to be a Rav. I know the halacha. You don't have to scrape the slats for dirt. It's not chametz. So she says to him again, he says, but you don't understand. I wrote the laws. I wrote the Mishnah Brura. The Chafetz Chaim wrote a Sefer Halacha, which many, many people use today. And I'm telling you, that as the poisek of what's chametz, you don't have to do this. So she looks up at her husband and she says, if I'm going to rely on you and your Shulchan Aruch, we're going to end up with chametz in the house on Pesach. That's the story. She was a simple woman. Again, I'm assuming it was a Zivik Sheni. This is the story that they tell. His wife said to him, if we're going to rely on you, we're going to chametz. I want to find the pshat in this place. This is not true anymore today. But in the olden days, there was an attitude among certain segments of people that the more learned you are, the more lenient you could be. They would quote the Ma'ameh Chazal, which is brought to halacha also. The job of a Rav is to make things treif. For that you can come to me. I can make anything you want treif. The job of a Rav is to make it kosher, to make it permitted. So there's a situation. And the situation becomes, there is a concept called Yiras Hashem, having fear of Hashem. If you learn more Torah, and you understand the Torah better, and you understand what the mitzvahs are, is that going to take away from Yiras Shamayim? It's going to add to Yiras Shamayim. And there's a very, very good answer to the question. The answer to the question is, if you live your life strictly by the Torah you learn, the more Torah you learn, the more lenient you're going to become. But if you understand that what you learn in the books is one thing, and what you do in life is something else, and between learning the books and living your life you pause, then you could be a big Talmid Chacham and a big Yirei Shamayim as well. If you learn all the Torah, and in your mind, if I know what the Torah says, I got to do what the Torah says, and no more, learning Torah will result in an attitude of, I don't have to be careful, I know what I'm doing, If, on the other hand, you learn Torah, the books tell me the ideas, and I study them and I know them. When it comes to action, there's a new idea that when I'm doing mitzvahs, I do them with Yiras Hashem, then the more Torah you learn is not going to make you less of Yiras Shamayim. Who's the example for this? The best example in the history of the world. Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech knew that it says in the Chumash, L'yar b'lei noshim. You shouldn't have more than 18 wives. Shlomo HaMelech knew that it says in the Chumash, V'kesef v'zohav l'yar b'lei ma'od, you're not allowed to have too much gold and silver. He's not allowed to have more horses than he eats Kedei Merkavte. And Shlomo HaMelech violated all of these lavim. They're not mitzvahs asay. They're mitzvahs lois asay. He married 1,000 women. And he had a huge stable of horses and all the rest. And people came to Shlomo HaMelech and they said to him, you're Shlomo HaMelech. You're the biggest Talmud Chacham. How come you're violating this Aveda, the Yabelei Noshim, and the rest? So Shlomo HaMelech said, because I'm such a big Talmud Chacham, I violate these Avedas. Because it says you shouldn't have too many wives, because they're going to lead you astray. I'm so smart, I can have more wives than the Torah permits, and it's not going to lead me astray. And of course the end was they did lead him astray. That's the pshat in this medrash. The Malachim didn't eat meat and milk together, but there was no fear of mixing meat and milk. And the Eibusha says to the Malachim that when a child eats meat, and then he's going to eat milk, and again, we're not going into the question now about meat before milk and milk before meat. The child hesitates. He's afraid that if he doesn't stop after he eats the meat and eats a piece of bread or drinks a little bit of water or both, before he eats the milk, he may end up mixing them. They have more Yiddish. You know it better. You understand the law more. But you're missing the Yiddish Shamayim that a person needs to keep mitzvahs, and therefore I cannot give you the Torah. That's the pshat in this medrash. That the Eibusha says to the Malachim, you're complaining that a child wouldn't do what you did. And when the Malachim answers the Eibusha, yeah, I know, but we didn't do anything wrong. It was just borderline. And the answer is, when it comes to translating the Torah into mitzvahs, there's no borderline. There's a pause. There's an interruption. And this is the pshat, that this story in the Chumash becomes a foundation for why we got the Torah. The Eibush did arrange b'hashgacha pratis, and the Malachim should come to Avraham Avinu, and Avraham should offer them a meal of basar b'cholav, and they should eat it. They didn't eat it mamish at the same time, but they ate it almost at the same time, and therefore the Eibush could say to the Malachim, where is your Yerei Shamayim, and it should result in us getting the Torah. So the Malachim's eating becomes a contributor to our receiving the Torah from the Eibush. Go ahead. I want to tell you guys, I can't answer all the questions because I don't have enough time. But go ahead. Your name is Menachem Mendel, yeah?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Isn't it just the opposite that we're supposed to bring the Torah like into our lives? Whatever we do, we're supposed to be like this. The Torah is supposed to bring down the Torah into our lives.
How is that the opposite of what I said?
You said you should keep the Torah like somewhat separate.
Keep the knowledge of the Torah separate. But the actions of the Torah, forget, that's the whole point. What you know in your head and what you do in your action, there's a hesitation, there's a pause. Now let's go back to the Zohar that I started the class with, because now the Zohar belongs here. The Zohar brings the two opinions. The first opinion is that the Zohar says that the Malachim ate, but they didn't actually eat the food. They made it look like they were eating the food to honor Avraham Avinu. And the second opinion, the Zohar says that the Malachim actually ate the food, but that the Malachim's eating food was not like we eat food. How do we eat food? We digest it, right? You chew it, you swallow it, it's broken down in your kishkis and your intestines, and then it's absorbed into the body, and it provides the body with energy, it provides with chemical parts and all kinds of other things that the body, minerals and chemicals, the biological components that the body needs for its sustenance. The Malachim's eating food was burning fire with fire, which means, Rabbi Yossi, that it was like a korban. In other words, the Malachim actually ate the food, but the eating the food did not consist of eating the way a person eats and breaking it down and making it the biological components, but eating the food was like the Indian of a korban. And then the Nitzutze Oirais on this Zohar says something gewaldig. Because in this Zohar, it's Daf Kuf Pei's Omed Aleph, where the Zohar is found. The Zohar explains at length that Avraham Avinu was very, very careful about Tara and Kedusha. Everything that he did was b'Tara. Even the food that he fed to a goy, let alone the food that he ate, everything was b'Tara. So the Zohar explains that the food that Avraham Avinu ate was like karbonis in Atzilus, like karbonis in Atzilus. So the Nitzutze Oides takes this story and flips it on its head. Avraham Avinu gave Malachim food. Avraham Avinu is a physical person. The Malachim are not physical, they're metaphysical people, which creates the question in the first place, what does it mean that the Malachim ate, they don't have a guf? They don't need to eat, right? But in this Zayar, according to the Chutzei Oides, you just flip it on his head. Avraham Avinu is in the Madrega of Atzilus. He's higher than the Madrega of Malachim. And when Avraham Avinu gives food to the Malachim eat that food since the way Avraham Avinu prepared the food. The food was pure and holy. He flips it on his head. The food was higher than the Malachim. It was above the Madrega of the Malachim. So when the Medrash said, the Zayar says, that the Malachim actually ate the food, what the Zayar is saying is that the Malachim got nourishment. They needed the food to give them nourishment. But the way it gave them nourishment was like fire burning fire like a korban. So this is the Zayar. The Zayar is saying that Avraham Avinu was higher than the Malachim. And because Avraham Avinu was in the Madreg, which is above the Malachim, Avraham Avinu was giving the Malachim food, was actually food for the Malachim. So in the Zayar, the way it goes is as follows. The Zayar brings two opinions. One opinion was that Avraham Avinu gave the Malachim food and they made believe they were eating. And the second opinion is Avraham Avinu gave the Malachim food and they actually ate. So what's the machlokes? The machlokes is not what they did. The machlokes is whether they benefited from it. According to the first Oifen, the Malachim didn't need the food. So they made it look like they're eating to be cooperative citizens, but they didn't need it. According to the second opinion, the pshat that they actually ate the food like a korban is that they were nourished. Avraham Avinu's food, because it was pure and holy, was actually feeding the Malachim. It's a bezindik kasha. Not everybody holds that it was at the same time, you know what I'm saying? And then you get to the Maimer. There's a Maimer from the Rebbe from 1953, Tafshin Yud Gimel, which is now 72 years old, based on a Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab from 50 years before Tafresh Tamar Gimel, which is based on a Maimer of the Alter Rebbe. It's called Vehu Omed VaYochailu. It's a fascinating Maimer. But it's the opposite of the Zohar I just told you. The Zohar that I just told you was that Avraham Avinu was above the Malachim, and Avraham Avinu fed the Malachim needed the food, because since he was higher than them, the food that Avraham Avinu gave them, even though it was physical, was nourishing to the Malachim. But there's a Maimer that says this similar idea, but it goes in the opposite direction entirely. According to Chassidus, when you bring a korban, part of the korban is put on the Mizbeach. And part of the korban is eaten by the Koyanim. Now, simply speaking, the part of the korban that's eaten by the Mizbeach, that's Hashem's part. And the part of the Koyan that's eaten by the Koyanim is the Koyanim's part. And I think most of us would agree that Hashem is on a higher madrege than the Koyanim, with all due respect to the Koyan. Yeah. But according to Kabbalah, there's a whole different insight into the idea of a korban. And I'll explain to you how it works, okay? When you're sacrificing a korban is a person. In every person, there's an animal and there's a person. And when you sacrifice the animal within the person, the animal has to be killed. The passion of the animal, which is the blood, the pleasure of the animal, which is the fat, has to be taken out. And the animal has to be sacrificed to the Eibishter, means it loses its form. When you sacrifice a korban to the Eibishter, it loses its form. So it says in Chassidus that when you sacrifice a korban, when you bring a korban, you kill your animal. What happens after you kill your animal? What happens to a person after he kills his animal? When a person kills his animal, his mensch emerges. We're a combination of a mensch and an animal. If you get the animal out of the way, the mensch comes out. And that's considered even higher than the korban. So the way you translate it is the first translation of korban is sacrifice. The animal within the person has to be sacrificed. The second translation of korban is from the word kiruf, to come close. The person within the korban has to come close. So it says in Chassidus that when you bring a korban on Mizbeach, the Mizbeach part of the korban is sacrificing the animal. The part of the korban eaten by the Kohanim is the person coming close. Or to say it in Hebrew, Achilas Odom is Lamaila mi Achilas Mizbeach. The Kohanim eating the korban is a higher level than the Mizbeach eating the korban. What the Mizbeach is doing is destroying the korban. And what the Kohanim are doing are raising up the Adam of the person to be involved in a higher Adam. So the Ramaram explain And Malachim are lower than people. Malachim are lower than people. But what happens to a Malach when Avraham Avinu stands over him as he eats? Avraham Avinu is Avraham Avinu. When these three Malachim sat and ate under the tree, Vehu Omed Alihem tachas ate, he stood over them as they ate, VaYochailu, when they ate the food. So the Chassidus explains that these Malachim, to put it in plain words, were the Madrega of Atzilus, Achilas Adam. Normally, Malachim are lower than people. When you sacrifice a person, the animal has to be destroyed and the person can emerge. These Malachim, because of Avraham Avinu, were in what's called the Madrega of Achilas Adam, which is hard in Achilas Madrega. In other words, their eating food was not destroying it, it was raising it up to a higher Madrega. So according to the Zohar, Avraham Avinu fed the Malachim, the food was coming down from a higher level to a lower level. And according to the Mamech Chassidus, Avraham Avinu was feeding the Malachim and he was standing over them as they were eating it, was raising up the food from a lower Madrega to a higher Madrega. But both according to the Zohar and according to the Chassidus, the Malachim were eating this food physically, not because it was physical food, because they wanted to look like they were amongst people, all the other things. Their eating this food was either giving life to the Malachim or was raising it up into a higher world. And that's the class.